Hi, I hope everyone is sufficiently caffeinated. And if you're not, fear not, we're going to try to wake you up with our discussion of content moderation and curation. On my way here, I was thinking that another name for the panel, or really for the conference in general, could be "The world is a big mess and we really need to figure out how to fix it, and it's urgent." Because at the root of this problem are really our ability to solve all the others, from environmental crises to vaccinations to political crises in individual countries, and so on. I was really struck yesterday when Daniel, in his session with Billy, said, if the social media carries on the way it's going now, we are going to get another world war. And I live across the world from Kenya in Georgia, a country of 3 million, and it certainly feels like that there. And I think Georgia is a really good example of some of the problems with the current setup that we have. It's a country that is living through an existential political crisis brought about by the onset, by the war in Ukraine in some ways. It's a country, and in a crisis like that, obviously independent media plays a huge role, and it is being attacked by the government using all the usual tools that governments use around the world to silence their critics. But it's also being attacked by Facebook. In recent years, the independent voices who pivoted to Facebook, and Facebook is the internet in Georgia, have found their engagement plummet over violating content community rules that they don't understand and no one explains to them. Two of the newsrooms, independent, vital newsrooms that I talked to recently said that both their audience engagement and their revenue has plummeted 90% just in the recent year, and they can't get any answers from Facebook, from Meta. And this is something that we see repeated again and again, from Ethiopia to the Philippines, Myanmar, where the polarization and the hate that is happening online is translating itself and changing our societies beyond recognition. So how do we fix it? We have a great panel here today. Moustapha Mamy Diaby is the Senior Advisor, ICT and Digital Transformation for the African Union. Then Catalina Botero Marino, Member and Co-Chair of Meta Oversight Board. David Kaye is a Professor of Law at the University of California Irvine, and he was also the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Éric Garandeau is the Director of Policies and Government Relations at TikTok, and Christopher Wylie is really a voice who was very fundamental in helping us understand a lot of the problems we're discussing here today. The Whistleblower, Cambridge Analytica, author of a great book called Mindfuck that I recommend all of you read. So, Catalina, if I may, I would love to start with you. Two questions that we're discussing here today, where UNESCO wants our input on the guidelines, where we'll be asking the audience for the input, is whether content moderation is at all a solution to the algorithmic recommendation problem. Is it?
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Natalia. I will speak in my own language. I think this is going to be a multicultural language session, isn't it? Okay, good. So I will speak in Spanish. Gracias, Natalia. Quisiera decir algo sobre las guías. Okay? Okay, good. Is it working? This is a problem of content moderation. Okay, so. Me gustaría decir algo antes sobre las guías para poder contestar tu pregunta. Lo que nos han pedido es que hagamos una digamos, consulta, participemos en la consulta sobre las guías y particularmente sobre el tema de la moderación de contenidos. Y yo quisiera decir, en primer lugar, que a mí me parece fundamental que UNESCO esté en este esfuerzo. Yo creo que se viene una fuertísima ola regulatoria. Nos puede gustar más o gustar menos, pero la ola regulatoria está enfrente nuestro y es fundamental que una organización como UNESCO sea capaz de construir unas guías uniformes fundadas en el derecho internacional de los derechos humanos con un enfoque multi-stakeholder que respete la arquitectura de Internet y que esté preocupada básicamente por regular estructuras y procesos para una mejor moderación de contenidos. Creo que esto empodera a todas las partes y creo que ayuda a guiar a los estados que lo quieren hacer bien y a contener a los estados que lo quieren hacer mal. Entonces me parece importante que UNESCO esté en este proceso y me parece todavía más importante que
Catalina,
ayer
if I may
hayan
interrupt, but the question that, where we need to be weighing in on UNESCO's guidelines, can algorithms, can content moderation solve what is essentially the algorithmic problem?
Depende, justamente iba a eso. Las guías tienen una virtud y es que no se limitan a comprender el problema de moderación de contenidos como el problema sencillo de resolver si un contenido debe permanecer o no en línea. Las guías tienen una perspectiva sistémica del problema de moderación de contenidos y eso a mí me parece valioso. Las guías no entienden, como lo entiende algún sector académico en algunos lugares del mundo, que la moderación de contenidos se limita a la agregación de las decisiones individuales sobre si algo debe quedarse o no. No. Las guías entienden que la moderación de contenidos supone las decisiones de diseño, los algoritmos, las políticas, las estructuras de las empresas y los procedimientos destinados a definir cómo circula una información, cómo interactúa la información con otras informaciones, cómo se amplifica o no se amplifica, de manera tal que podamos identificar un riesgo, prevenir ese riesgo y tomar decisiones para que la esfera pública pueda ser un poco más sana. Eso yo creo que es uno de los aspectos más valiosos de esta guía, que no se limita simplemente a la idea de moderación de contenido simple, como dejar o quitar un determinado contenido, sino que interviene incluso en los algoritmos y las decisiones de diseño. Ahora, hay muchas cosas que yo creo que hay que corregir en la guía, pero esa perspectiva sistémica me parece valiosa.
Moustapha, Mamy, Diaby, I wanted to ask you the next question. Africa, the continent in general, is so on the front line of a lot of the problems, paying the big price for a lot of that is happening. You know, we've seen it in Kenya, we see it in Ethiopia, in so many other places, and yet none of the solutions so far that are being discussed in Washington and Brussels are really applicable to the continent. Does the continent feel left out from that conversation? Would be great to get your assessment.
Merci. Merci. Je pense que quand on discute des questions de contenu dans un environnement universel, les défis, les problématiques touchent tout le monde. Il n'y a pas de défi africain, il n'y a pas de problématique spécifique à l'Afrique, parce que l'Internet est un bien universel. L'accès à l'Internet est aujourd'hui garanti à travers l'existence des infrastructures à tous les citoyens, qu'ils soient africains, européens, asiatiques ou américains. Le défi lié à la modération, à mon avis, la question n'est pas est-ce qu'il faille faire de la modération. Oui, il est important de faire de la modération. Mais comment faire la modération pour éviter de verser dans la censure? Qui devrait pouvoir faire de la modération? Sous quel cadre? Parce que tout doit partir de la définition d'un cadre légal et réglementaire. Faire d'abord un processus ex ante qui permette de guider, d'encadrer les actions qui doivent être entreprises dans le cadre d'une modération. On entend souvent parler de valeurs universelles, le droit, mais la notion de l'universalité ici ne devrait pas perdre de vue les spécificités culturelles, les valeurs morales des différentes communautés. Et pourquoi on modère? On modère pour éviter qu'il y ait un conflit entre les contenus qui sont mis en ligne et les valeurs morales des différentes communautés, les valeurs culturelles, l'éthique. Parce que ce qui, hier je le disais, ce qui est acceptable par ailleurs peut ne pas l'être dans un autre contexte ou dans un autre village ou dans un autre pays. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, au niveau du continent africain, les discussions sont en cours. Il y a des débats sur l'impact des contenus mis en ligne sur certains pays, sur certains groupes de personnes, sur même la stabilité politique et démocratique dans certaines régions. Parce que la désinformation, on le dit souvent, l'information est une arme. Quand c'est la bonne information, elle contribue à consolider la paix et le vivre ensemble. Quand c'est la désinformation, elle contribue à créer de l'instabilité politique, de l'instabilité démocratique et même à créer des conflits entre des communautés. Vous avez cité des pays africains, je n'aimerais pas citer pour ne pas qu'il y ait une mauvaise interprétation, mais je voudrais dire ici qu'il est essentiel que l'UNESCO et toutes les autres structures internationales, les académies se donnent la main pour qu'il y ait une compréhension commune qui tienne compte de la diversité culturelle et pour que cette modération des contenus soit une modération intelligente.
And Catalina, just briefly back to you off the back of this comment, do you think it's feasible, and Éric, I would love to ask you the same question. I mean, when we're talking about cultural differences and intricacies and nuances, is it even feasible for platforms to have the content moderation at the level that is required to, I mean, are we being realistic here? Is it feasible to have the level of content moderation that is required to accommodate the world? Right now, we know very little about the way that Facebook is moderated. You know, Facebook is not very transparent. Meta is not very transparent about the numbers of moderators and how they work. But is it really feasible and compatible with the business model?
Tú mencionaste una palabra fundamental, transparencia. Si es o no es factible, solo lo podemos saber en la medida en que las compañías sean más transparentes. Lo que está clarísimo es que, uno, yo creo que se debe moderar contenido ilegal, y el contenido es ilegal si es ilegal de conformidad con el derecho internacional de los derechos humanos, y creo que aquí hay un relativismo cultural del cual tendríamos que conversar. Fundamentalmente, ese es el contenido que a mi juicio se debe moderar. En segundo lugar, creo que las compañías tienen que hacer un esfuerzo extraordinario en tener moderadores de contenidos que conozcan el contexto local, que conozcan la lengua local, que estén suficientemente entrenados y que tengan un cuidado, por ejemplo, en materia de salud mental, porque lo que los moderadores de contenido tienen que ver en América Latina o en África no tiene nada que ver con lo que los moderadores de contenido ven en los Estados Unidos o en Europa. En Estados Unidos y Europa tienen un Internet purificado. Necesitamos urgente mayor inversión en moderación de contenidos en contextos locales, no para sacar contenidos que puedan ofender sensibilidades locales. Yo creo que ahí, eso es una discusión de derechos humanos, que es una discusión que podría tomar mucho más tiempo, pero creo que básicamente debe estar dirigida a la moderación de contenidos, a excluir el contenido ilegal. Y con cooperación y con corregulación, a moderar contenido que efectivamente pueda producir un daño en las instituciones democráticas y en los derechos humanos.
But do you see the companies moving? The question is, do you see the companies moving that way? Because so far we've really seen Meta spend a lot more money on lobbying efforts, on on basically PR and lobbying efforts than on content moderation. And I mean, UNESCO guidelines are important, but they're not going to force any company to jump in and change anything. What makes you hopeful that we're actually heading the direction when content moderation is, in fact, being taken seriously by companies?
Pues, Natalia, una cosa rápida. Todo esto genera presión para las compañías. Las compañías no van todas en la misma dirección. Meta no va en la misma dirección que Twitter. Y Twitter no va en la misma dirección que Wikipedia, y esas no van en la misma dirección que las pequeñas startups. Pero todo esto genera una enorme presión para que tengan que profundizar la manera de hacer moderación de contenidos para generar realmente una esfera pública que incluya los valores del Estado de Derecho.
Okay, I was catching up with the translation. Éric, this is a good, so more pressure is one of the answer. I can't think of anyone who has more pressure in their job than you do. You represent a company that is under so much scrutiny in Europe and the United States. There's so many skeptics who look at TikTok and see Beijing, but I mean, rightly so, because it's a Chinese company. So, how do you, very interested in your take on this, like, is it something that companies will take seriously, content moderation, and is content moderation going to help the issue that we face?
Merci beaucoup, je vais parler aussi en français. Le mot-clé que j'aime beaucoup, vous avez cité le mot diversité et aussi vous avez cité le mot transparence. Voilà. Et ces deux mots extrêmement importants pour TikTok, qui est une plateforme où on a toute la diversité des expressions, des idées, des opinions qui peut s'exprimer, y compris au sein de l'entreprise. Donc c'est une entreprise qui est d'origine chinoise, mais qui est devenue une entreprise totalement multiculturelle et où toutes les nationalités peuvent se retrouver, se représenter et dialoguer ensemble. On vient sur TikTok pour faire des vidéos, pour créer et aussi pour partager ces vidéos et donc pour partager ses passions. C'est avant tout une plateforme où on vient se divertir, mais on peut aussi s'informer, on peut même s'éduquer. Voilà, c'est aussi une plateforme de connaissances. Et on développe notamment des programmes Learn on TikTok ou TikTok Academy. Ce sont des contenus justement informatifs et qui viennent apporter un savoir. Voilà. Et c'est ce savoir qui permettra aussi de lutter contre la désinformation. La modération, c'est évidemment un élément tout à fait fondamental. D'ailleurs, quand on regarde les effectifs de TikTok, en fait, les gros bataillons, ce sont les modérateurs. Hein. Enfin, donc, c'est plusieurs milliers de personnes.
How many?
On a à peu près, et ça change tous les jours, mais on a au moins 10 000 modérateurs, des personnes humaines qui viennent modérer en 60 langues.
10,000 moderators.
Voilà.
For billions and billions of people.
Alors, en fait, la question n'est pas le nombre d'êtres humains. C'est la meilleure combinaison, et ça je pense que ma collègue sera d'accord, c'est la meilleure combinaison entre une appréciation humaine fine qui permet de faire la différence entre un discours et un contre-discours. Si vous voyez une croix gammée dans une vidéo, ça peut être une vidéo nazie, ça peut être aussi une vidéo du mémorial de la Shoah que nous avons embarqué sur TikTok il y a quelques mois et qui va évidemment avoir un discours critique, plus que critique, sur les nazis. Donc en fait, c'est ce travail de discernement qui doit être fait par un être humain, si possible de la bonne langue. Et ensuite, cet être humain, il est évidemment connecté à des algorithmes, donc de l'intelligence artificielle, qui, avec des listes de mots-clés, des listes d'images, vont pouvoir confronter, par exemple, tout ce qui est insulte, tout ce qui est racisme, antisémitisme, expression violente.
So you think
voilà.
10,000 moderators is a sufficient number for all the content that is being put out?
Ce que je dis, c'est que c'est pas... Déjà, c'est un très grand nombre de personnes, comme vous l'imaginez. Et la question, encore une fois, c'est la meilleure combinaison de l'intelligence humaine et de l'intelligence artificielle. Et donc, il y a un travail constant pour développer des nouveaux outils qui vont regarder les sons, les images, les textes dans les biographies, les commentaires, et qui vont pouvoir intervenir. On élimine à peu près 1 million de vidéos par jour. Donc effectivement, le défi, c'est de traiter la masse des vidéos qui sont postées, c'est de traiter la diversité des langues, c'est de traiter cette subtilité que je disais, parce qu'il ne s'agit pas d'aller à l'excès contre ce qui relève aussi de la liberté d'expression, hein. Donc on n'est pas du tout dans la censure, mais donc il y a des développements technologiques extrêmement importants qui sont faits pour avoir cette meilleure combinaison. Par ailleurs, les utilisateurs eux-mêmes peuvent signaler des contenus. Donc quand vous pressez sur une vidéo, vous pouvez signaler le fait que pour vous, il y a un utilisateur trop jeune, ou que c'est une vidéo extrémiste, qu'elle ne respecte pas la propriété intellectuelle, parce qu'il y a aussi ce sujet-là, ou que c'est une vidéo qui essaie de harceler quelqu'un, donc le harcèlement est aussi interdit évidemment. Donc les utilisateurs eux-mêmes sont des auxiliaires de ce travail de modération.
So you're getting users to self-regulate, basically, in terms of content.
Ils participent à ce travail, ils ne sont pas les seuls. Il y a tout le travail qui est fait évidemment par les modérateurs que je citais, par les outils d'intelligence artificielle, par ce qu'on appelle aussi les trusted flaggers, les tiers de confiance. Donc on est connecté à un très grand nombre de think tanks, d'associations. Par exemple, sur la protection des enfants, nous avons e-enfance, qui peut nous signaler des contenus, ou en France aussi on a l'éducation nationale, le ministère de l'éducation nationale qui va nous envoyer aussi des alertes quand il y a des cas difficiles qui sont mentionnés, pour pouvoir agir le plus rapidement possible. Et puis évidemment il y a les autorités dans chaque pays qui font elles-mêmes des signalements.
Yeah, I mean, I would obviously the constraints of a panel, you know, I would really like to dig deeper into both the transparency. I'm aware that TikTok is on a massive sort of transparency campaign, again, spending millions of dollars on PR efforts, setting up transparency tents in Washington and so on. And I think there's still I can't not acknowledge that there's still very big questions about the data transparency and what happens. And, you know, you are in this ecosystem of a company that is censoring, you know, the Chinese equivalent of TikTok is censoring heavily others, and you are in that ecosystem. So I think it's important to address these
there
issues.
is no censorship on TikTok. I mean, you can really tape any question about any subject, and you will see that there is no censorship in terms of political censorship.
Right, but there is a lot of political censorship on the Chinese equivalent on your, you know, sister company.
That's an interesting question. So we have really to distinguish TikTok and Douyin, which is something completely separated, completely different. So TikTok is operating everywhere in the world except in China, and so there are specific rules in China, and on TikTok other rules that are very similar to the other platforms.
Mm-hmm. Due to, I could carry on, I would like to, but due to our time constraints, David, I'd like to come to you. I mean, you know, I often wonder when we cover platforms and when we talk about these issues, whether content moderation is a little bit actually lipstick on the pig, something that, you know, doesn't really address the root of the problem. As you know, look through the UNESCO guidelines, what do you think are the biggest weaknesses in there? And what are the weaknesses of this discussion?
Well, this discussion is great. And I actually, the way you asked the question is really important, and I go back to what Catalina was saying, which is that content moderation isn't the only way to address the kinds of problems that we're talking about. There are systemic issues, and I think that the UNESCO draft guidelines actually, as you mentioned, recognize that there is a systemic way of addressing these issues. It's not only about content moderation in particular, it's about transparency, it's about other things as well. But I want to go back to something that Vera Jourova said in her remarks at the opening. She said that, and this ties to the UNESCO guidelines as well, and it really ties to the whole conversation. So she said that the most important element, or maybe I'm paraphrasing, but the most important element of democracy is trust. And I wonder if that's true. I mean, from my perspective, the most important element of democracy is voice, is the ability to participate in public activities, to participate in governance. And if we flip around the entire title of this conference and the guidelines away from Internet of Trust to really Internet of Voice, then we start to see, and I think we would start to engage with the issues of disinformation and hatred and harassment as things that need to be controlled, but also that voice is important, perhaps the most important thing, and that restrictions on voice have to be seen as exceptional. And in fact, that's the way that human rights law treats freedom of expression and restrictions on freedom of expression. Restrictions are meant to be exceptional. And so if we think of them that way, then my view is that the guidelines need to be very clear that they are modeling a human rights approach to content moderation. And that means, and I think the Special Rapporteur from the Inter-American Commission mentioned this yesterday, and solidarity with Pedro on this, the three-part test is critical. And that means that the guidelines should model first legality. Any rules that are adopted, whether they're guidelines or content moderation rules, should be clear, not providing too much discretion to whoever's going to be doing the censoring, but clear rules rooted in law if it's regulation, in policy if it's content moderation. They need to be legitimate, right? So it can't be restricting expression merely because you don't like it. There must be some reason, some legitimate reason why. Maybe it's protecting the rights of others. Maybe it's protecting others' right to access information, which would be protecting voice. And they need to be necessary and proportionate. And I think the guidelines as they stand right now don't necessarily, in several particular areas, don't really meet that kind of standard. And I think that they can, and UNESCO has a very strong history of doing that, of really modeling this kind of work. And from my perspective, that's what they need to be doing, modeling a human rights approach. And they mention human rights, but they really need to model them in the specifics of what they're telling regulators as to what it means to have a human rights approach to content moderation.
Thank you. I promise this is not orchestrated, but I actually can't think of a better segue to Chris, speaking of the importance of voice and having the voice and protecting voices. Your voice has been silenced on Meta's platforms. You have not committed any crime. You have not spread hate. You were a whistleblower who criticized the platform, and you're still banned from them. That is a form of content moderation, and it's very indicative of the problems that we're dealing with. What's your take on all of it?
Yeah, I am still banned on, I guess, Meta now, Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, after I blew the whistle, it was the first thing that they did. They banned me and never let me back on, despite the fact that I was the most transparent party in that whole shebang.
Have you asked the Oversight Board about this?
No, because, I mean, first of all, do I need to be back on a platform that contributes to so many problems in the world? Not really. But also, I mean, I go to Facebook court, you know, to take on Facebook in Facebook court? Like, it's silly. The fact that, I mean, it's yeah, you know, but I think, you know, to the points around content moderation, I find I go to a lot of these conferences, and I find them slightly frustrating because so often we talk about things like transparency or content moderation or the role of journalists and all of that, and it's all very important. But for me, I feel like we don't address like a more fundamental problem, which a lot of these issues flow from, which is bad engineering. You know, a lot of the discourse, yeah, I mean, it's shitty engineering. A lot of the words that we use when we're describing what is a platform, right? You know, when Mark Zuckerberg goes to Congress, he uses the word service. We often talk about free services. And it gets our mind thinking about, you know, users and their relationships with a platform, and it gets our thinking away from the people who are actually responsible for the design itself, which is engineers and architects, right? When you look at the top job titles in Silicon Valley, it's not, you know, service relationship manager, it's architect and engineer. And the reason that's important is because if you actually look at how we regulate every other technological sector, whether it's aerospace, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether, you know, whatever, automotive, we regulate through the prism of safety and harm prevention first. That is how we typically regulate technology. And for whatever reason, we've sort of jumped over the fundamental architectures of these platforms and moved our inquiry away from why are you designing it like this, Not how many, do you have 10,000, 20,000 content, it doesn't matter. Because the fact that you need content moderators shows that you have a design failure. So why is it that there is more safety regulations for a refrigerator or a toaster in your kitchen than safety regulations for platforms that touch billions of people? Why is it that if I wanted to make a new product, a toaster, right, or a kitchen appliance, a lamp, that I would have to do safety testing? I would have to show a technically competent regulator that I've done my due diligence, I've thought about harm prevention, I've thought about the fire exits in the building, the wiring, how things work, and that I show a technically competent regulator and I ask permission ahead of releasing a new product into the market. And what we've got here is a situation where we have bad engineering where it is lawful to release untested bad engineering into the public with no safety standards and no oversight.
So are you saying that the solution is actually there and we're just not seeing it? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can take the mechanisms that are already there. Because so often you hear, well, these people, the aging senators in the United States and European regulators, they don't understand
I've testified at Congress like 5 times. I've met lots of them. I've testified Parliament. I've met tons of politicians.
Isn't it a problem that they don't understand it?
My opinion is, it doesn't matter. We should not expect a member of Congress to be a technical expert. We don't. When we look at pharmaceutical standards, right, safety standards, automotive, whatever, we don't do debates at Congress or at UNESCO around how to fix a safety problem, right? Legislators around the world create technically competent regulators, empower and devolve powers to those regulators to set technical standards where industry has to apply to that regulator for permission to release a product. And to me, like, the fact that we're talking about content moderation here, it's like, why aren't we talking about the underlying design that's causing this problem in the first place? To me, it's like if you had a chemical company with a spill and they say we're investing in more, cancer doctors because we've caused cancer everywhere, rather than going, well, why do you have, shoddy infrastructure where your train derails, right? It doesn't make sense to me, and it misses the entire point.
Catalina, I thought you wanted to jump in. We are over time. We have to go to the audience, but I want to give you an opportunity to jump in. You wanted to as well. If you can keep the remarks very short, I'll appreciate it.
Yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo contigo. I totally agree with you. Yo creo que el problema de moderación de contenidos nuevamente no es tener en práctica unos sistemas que miren si una decisión concreta, específica, es correcta o no. Yo creo que tiene que ver con las estructuras, las políticas y los procedimientos a través de los cuales la información ingresa, circula, interactúa, se amplifica. Por eso creo que las guías aportan una visión muy interesante a este problema, porque es una visión sistémica, es una visión similar a la de la Ley de Servicios Digitales. Entonces, ¿qué dice? Que las plataformas tienen que hacer una investigación previa de análisis de riesgo. Y eso es fundamental. Ahora, hay que tener cuidado con la capacidad de los estados de incidir en eso. Porque si estamos tratando de evitar grandes vectores de desinformación, también lo decía ayer el relator Pedro Vaca, los estados son grandes vectores de desinformación. Adicionalmente, hay otros vectores de desinformación como los grandes conglomerados que se aprovechan de las compañías y utilizan las compañías para generar discurso de odio, desinformación, tribalismo y, digamos, emociones tristes. Lo que tenemos que ver es cómo funcionan esas decisiones de diseño y lo tenemos que hacer con la sociedad civil en la mesa. No puede estar simplemente concentrada en manos de los estados porque yo creo que el remedio es peor que la enfermedad. Hay que desconcentrarlo de las compañías porque no ha salido bien y hay que subir a la mesa a la sociedad civil. ¿A qué sociedad civil? A la que no está presente. Particularmente, let me say something. Particularmente la sociedad civil del sur global, que no está presente en esas conversaciones, en donde están las poblaciones racializadas, las mujeres e inmigrantes que sufren las consecuencias de una mala moderación de contenidos. Entonces estoy de acuerdo, hay que mirar este problema de manera sistémica.
But if I think Chris's point was that we shouldn't be laying the burden of responsibility on already overstretched civil society, journalists, and Meta is a good example of using journalists as fact checkers and so on.
I mean,
because it's ultimately the engineering problem. We don't ask civil society to fix our cancer medication.
Imagine if we regulated aerospace like that. Right? Like, if planes are falling out of the sky and we go, well, we need more NGO participation to prevent airplanes from falling out of the sky. It's ridiculous.
David, I'll go to, sorry.
I just want to
and then we'll
intervene
have to
here.
go.
First of all, everything that, I agree with most, not all, but most of what you said. And I agree totally with Catalina here. But I do want to emphasize the point that we're not talking about aerospace. We are ultimately talking about systems that people use day to day, which you know super well. So you're always going to need. You're always going. You're always come on. You're always going to need content moderators. Why? Because people are using this for voice. They're using it for good reasons, massively for good reasons. But also, and I'm remembering yesterday's YouTube influencer who talked about how government repressed him, attacked him, harassed him, and how did he fight back? He built basically an influence network of his own on YouTube. And so we need to maintain that space, but ultimately it's also about social space. And it's about human engagement. And so when we're talking about content moderation, I don't think we can rely only on technology as an answer. It can't only be technology. There aren't engineers, as you know, who can just say, let's zap this bad stuff and create an upload filter and make sure that everything is off the platform. So ultimately, we do need systems that address this. It's an engineering problem, but it's not only an engineering problem.
But then why do we release, if we accept that it's too difficult to solve, right? That we are creating technologies.
I didn't say it's too difficult.
Well, but you just said that you will always need this, and I'm not saying that content moderation is a bad thing, but what I am saying is the way we talk about this is manifestly different than how we talk about technology in other sectors. And the reason why that's important is because we wouldn't allow Ford Motor Company to say, well, it's really difficult not to make exploding cars. Sometimes cars explode, right? So just accept it. Or what we need? We need more transparency. We need better, safety standards and all the, like, the fundamental problem, I think, is that we aren't putting the onus on the actual engineers and the designers in the first place before they release something that is dangerous into the public. That's what I'm saying, that we need a precautionary principle and we need harm prevention prior to releasing a dangerous
totally
product.
agree with
Sorry,
that.
I have to stop you. Éric, 30 seconds, and then we're going to the audience.
No, I agree that there has to be a check and balance system within each platform, and that's why taking into consideration what happened in the past with other platforms, in TikTok, for instance, when you release a feature, then you go to the trust and safety team. They check if this feature is really won't harm anybody. Are there not contradictory effects? And then it goes to the public policy. So there is a check and balance inside the company, and then there is a check and balance outside of the company.
But there is such lack of transparency. There's so little we understand about TikTok, and then there is also Telegram, and there are all these other companies that
and then you have the regulators.
I
agree on that
and
also.
so on. So
I agree that there are regulators also.
I mean, you're basically arguing for self-regulation, which we know from history doesn't
that works
work.
so well.
But I do want to go to the audience. We have to get your inputs as well. So I can see, yes, please. Oh, so many. Yes, please, white sweater. Hardly.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Courtney Raj. I'm a fellow at the UCLA Institute for Technology, Law and Policy. So refreshing to hear Chris's point. I think that if we're talking about content moderation in this, speech, we're missing the fact that these are data extraction industries, and the business is fundamentally about digital advertising and profiteering. So I think it's very helpful to think about needing to, go through some safety assessments, some business model, reviews, et cetera, before going to market. But I think the problem is we're looking at hey, they have these aspects of speech. Part of their product is a publication platform, but that's not sufficient. You can't create a baby food, factory without going through a bunch of hoops. You can't even start a nail parlor without getting certified. How is it possible that any company is just allowed to start collecting data, selling it, aggregating it, creating all of this technology? The other point I wanted to make is around some of the
20 seconds.
The trend that we're seeing now, where if we're talking about algorithmic recommendation systems, having verification is an important signal for algorithms. Yet we're seeing Facebook, Twitter, and others transfer into having paid verification, which is undermining algorithmic systems and potentially furthering disinformation, et cetera, and making it harder for those recommendation systems to make sense.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a whole new development that puts another spin on it. So we'll go in the back, the gentleman who has a magazine up.
Thank you very much for recognizing my magazine. My name is Peter Bruck. I'm the chairman of the World Summit Awards, which is the Austrian initiative in the context of the World Summit on Information Society to put a focus on content-driven applications. In Europe, we are talking about something called sovereignty by design when we look at data spaces and data exchange and the further development of data markets, especially also in regard to the coming up Data Act. What would it mean in terms of the discussion which we have here to have a design terminology for the architecture of platforms? And I think this would be something where we can put the issue of guidelines into the engineering domain and make sure that we are not actually putting band-aids on the after effects, but that we are actually dealing with the root causes for the issues and problems which we are dealing with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will come back to that question later. Let's go, notebook now. I have a bias for people who lift up things. Yes, to you. Go ahead. Black sweater with a, yes. And if you could keep your interventions as short as possible, please, so that we can get as many as...
Hi, my name is Luisa. I am a student at the University of Oxford. This goes to Christopher. Christopher, we're very grateful for what you did when you had the chance to speak out. But the way in which you are referring to how you think these decisions should be made, I mean, relying mostly on technology and leaving it to regulatory agencies outside Congress, makes me think that you are a bit forgetting the fact that when you're limiting speech, you're limiting a fundamental right, which would require the intervention of Congress in a democracy. That's it.
Thank you very much. We'll get that addressed as well. Yes, yes, you in the black T-shirt, glasses. Yes.
Check. Thank you. So my name is Shirley. I'm from Indonesia. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah. So what I heard from the panel that the content moderation and social media platforms that we are encountering involve the algorithms and the bad engineering problem, the structure of the companies, and also about human content moderation mechanisms and other related content moderation mechanisms. So probably if any of us in here are not familiar yet with the social media for peace project of UNESCO, so there are currently 4 countries from Indonesia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kenya, and also Colombia. We are currently establishing local civil society coalitions on content moderation. So I'm involved in the process, and while I was sitting here as an audience, I am wondering, where should we start with all the complexities of the problem? Should we start from the technical problem, or should we start from the content moderation mechanisms?
And this is completely independent content moderation? It's just your initiative, or is it under an umbrella of a platform?
So this is a collaborative initiative together with UNESCO and also Article 19 and also the local actors. So where should we start? Thank you.
Yeah, we better take questions first. You have been raising, gentleman in front, you've been raising your hand for a while.
Good morning, I'm Bertrand Lachapelle from the Executive Director of Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. Just a quick remark. I love this panel because it is a perfect illustration of the 5 blind men and the elephant, or the 5 blind people and the elephant. Each of those angles are absolutely right. There is a technical engineering dimension. There's a huge human rights dimension. There's a huge day-to-day management of people who are misusing those platforms. The only thing I wanted to highlight is Emma Bates, yesterday on the panel I was on, said that basically the platforms that are coming now are much more aware of all the problems and they have to take much more action than the ones that were before. And I want to say to Chris that in as much as I wholeheartedly support what you're putting as an angle, I wouldn't go as far as saying pre-permission for releasing, but more something that is about when you create a new platform, you have to respect a certain number of technical norms and things like that. Because prior permission is pushing the envelope a little bit too far, and that was one of the beauties of the internet, to have permissionless innovation. Responsibility is something that comes with the creation of something new, and there are many parallels in other sectors that we can take inspiration from. All those dimensions have to be integrated in a larger debate, and I think it's the benefit of this session at UNESCO to see that there are different angles on defining the same elephant.
Thank you. Yes, please, you with the green brochure.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. I'm going to speak in French. I'm Miss Richie Kamara Maria Massangiana. Very interesting panel, as you said, a very different discussion. My question will go to Mr. Diaby. Monsieur Diaby, vous avez parlé de modération de contenu d'Internet. J'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce qui est fait au niveau de l'Union africaine, sachant que les GAFAM en général et d'autres compagnies d'intelligence artificielle ne sont pas représentées sur le continent africain. Ils sont liés au marché Middle East, qu'on appelle Middle East Africa. Qu'est-ce qui est fait au niveau de l'Union africaine à ce niveau-là? Et quand vous parlez de modération de contenu, qu'en est-il de la liberté d'expression en Afrique face à ça, sans passer dans la censure et tout? Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Again, we'll take all the interventions and then get to these questions. Yes, you.
So first of all, this panel's fascinating. Thank you for it. I'm Daniel from ActDefense. I've noticed that there's overwhelming focus on the main platforms that, as one of the panelists said, actually have a lot of processes in place that are self-imposed. But a lot of the worst things happening on the internet are happening on low moderation platforms that don't even try. So for example, like Telegram is home to the worst online harm that we've seen in the past few years, but they're not even here. So what are we doing to regulate the gatekeepers of the internet that enable low moderation platforms to come online, like the ISPs and those organizations?
Thank you for that question. It's an important point. And yes, you thought it was you who is asking. Black sweater, please.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me. Yes, my question is to all, I suppose, but primarily to those who have been protected or hurt by it. The issue of anonymity, pseudonymity. Is this, although it in parts and in certain functions and places, it may be positive and favoring, is this a cause to aggrandizing the problems? Is this a cause for, shall we say, the aggrandizement, again, I can't remember the right word right now, of the problem of incognito predators that we have been inundated with? Is anonymity as a congenital, shall we say, element and quality of the internet. Is this a problem? Can we incriminate it? Can we change it? Would it be possible to change it in a structural regulation process of the internet? Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have more interventions rather than questions in terms of like inputs into the discussion and the guidelines themselves? Because I understand that's what organizers are after. So if that's, can we take a couple of them? We have a lot of questions to answer. All right, the red notebook, please.
Thank you. Rodrigo Cetina from Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. So we've been talking about content moderation, but I think at the root of the problem, there's the fact that companies are actually in the business of the opposite. They're in the business of letting any type of content circulate on platforms to generate engagement and then profit. So I wanted to ask, what can be done to encourage platforms to be creative, both established platforms and upcoming players, to be creative at finding a different, less harmful business model? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. No more questions, but can we have the inputs into the discussion and into the guidelines? So if it is the input that you have, can you please raise your hand? Oh, wow. I mean, the winner there with a laptop up, I can't forgo that.
We're learning here. I'm Nicholas Brigham-Adams from Wylie Labs and public editor, and I just want to raise my voice again for the multiple technical and research organizations that are independent of the platforms and are building solutions in this space. So some people are noting and recognizing the ways that the algorithms are tuned for profit and not for the best quality information, but there are also groups like Je suis là, there's Alliance for Europe, there's the Disarm group, and they're working on different pieces of the problem. I want to just highlight what someone said before. This is like the elephant. We don't have to argue for which piece is the most important part of the problem. All of them need to be addressed, and there are independent groups who are working to address them, who merely need the support of regulators in terms of interoperability policy that forces the platforms to work with us and let us bring our solutions to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take two more interventions, please, and then we'll go back to the discussions and try to address some of the questions. So, yes, please, go ahead, flashlight. Can't fight my own bias.
All right, Joseph Alonga. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes. My name is Dominique Migisha. I am the head of the National Digital Development Agency from Democratic Republic of Congo. I will speak in French. Donc, ma contribution est la suivante. J'ai remarqué dans les débats que, effectivement, on s'excuse pratiquement vis-à-vis des privés, donc des développeurs de plateformes, alors que, comme ça a été dit, il y a un problème de dangerosité. Bien sûr, ce qu'ils ont fait, comme les inventeurs des voitures et de tous les produits, pour améliorer la vie des gens, à la base, c'est quelque chose de positif, permettre aux gens d'échanger. Mais derrière, il y a une dangerosité. Et il faut prendre ça en considération. Alors, sur le principe de la régulation et la modération, tout à l'heure, le responsable de TikTok a dit « nous avons 10 000 modérateurs ». Vous avez dit 10 000 pour autant de milliards d'utilisateurs. Qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire? Lorsque vous construisez un bâtiment, vous devez mettre un certain nombre d'extincteurs. C'est les pompiers qui vous disent, pour telle superficie, tel nombre d'extincteurs. Pourquoi est-ce que pour ces plateformes, tel nombre de milliards de consommateurs, vous devez avoir autant de modérateurs, autant de dispositifs, en fonction du nombre d'utilisateurs, des principes qu'on leur impose. On ne leur dit pas, s'il vous plaît, est-ce que vous pourriez? Parce que lorsque vous construisez un bâtiment, ce n'est pas vous qui dites, moi je vais mettre 50 extincteurs parce que ça m'arrange. Parce que derrière, ce n'est qu'une affaire d'argent. Ça a été dit hier, la modération, ça coûte cher. Et si vous laissez les privés décider en fonction de ces aspects financiers, bien sûr, les TikTok, les Facebook, ils vont tout faire pour réduire leurs coûts. Donc, il faut s'imposer, les gouvernements doivent s'imposer comme ça se fait dans d'autres secteurs parce qu'il y a de la dangerosité. Et je terminerai par ceci. Lorsqu'on a parlé du toaster, c'est une dangerosité à l'échelle privée.
Thank you.
Et lorsqu'on parle des plateformes, ça peut aller jusqu'à la guerre, ça a été dit. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'il y a de plus dangereux qu'un produit qui peut amener jusqu'à la guerre?
I'll take one more intervention and then we have to get some input from the online moderators, I think, at this point. So, yes, please, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, dear panelists. My name is Diaby. I'm a delegate from Iran. I have a comment and question regarding cross-border digital platforms is deemed as an essential matter for both governments and users. Therefore, the focus of guidance should be on platforms rather than states. We believe that main purpose of regulating cross-border digital platforms should be protecting all individuals and societies against fake news, disinformation, illegal, criminal, and harmful content, while respecting human rights. In accordance with international obligation of each member state, security, the availability of accurate and reliable information in the service of public good of societies. Therefore, cross-border digital platforms should observe international law and national and ethical frameworks of countries where they operate and have digital presence and provide service to its citizens.
Thank you very much.
You
have 10 seconds, I'm afraid.
Second. We believe the guidance should be extended to cover content that is harmful to national security, public order, mental peace and tranquility, public health and safety, morality, the image of societies and nations, trust to public institutions, cultural and social values.
Thank you very much. We don't have any more time for the interventions, but we do need to take the online feedback from those people who are watching us online. Is this going to happen? I'm looking at organizers, so I can't see. Is this going to happen now, or should we go to it later? Okay, it sounds like, yes, and we have our online. Yes, please, over to you.
Thank you so very much, and good morning, everyone. We wanted to thank all of our participants joining us again today, both online and in person. And we really wanted to thank everyone again for engaging in the digital engagement tool and in our conference as a whole to ensure that you and everyone really can have a voice in this process. So I'll start by rereading the questions posed to the audience for this session, which was, how can content moderation policies and practices ensure that algorithmic recommender systems designed to maximize engagement and addiction do not become drivers for hate and disinformation? One contribution we received is from a media in Ethiopia, which reads, for countries such as Ethiopia, leaving content moderation for individuals has created a void, because if their affiliation with ethnic group, religious group, or political affiliation they have. We believe supporting the creation of media houses with strong editorial team is the key answer, because content moderation is not the only problem. It's about creating trust and voice. My question is, what has been planned in creating strong journalists and strong editorials in East Africa, especially in Ethiopia? It could be supporting, for example, journalism schools and supporting trusted media houses in Ethiopia. We also received a comment from academia, which reads, content moderation on private platforms is not and should not be government action. So due process is applicable only as a high-level concept. In the case of government-ordered takedowns, ordinary due process obligations should apply. And this includes where government asks for content to be taken down pursuant to company policies, as through internet referral units, for example. I highly recommend the framework put forward by Evelyn Dueck on content moderation as administrative law as an alternative model to the judicial one. It is not desirable to have one rule for how all platforms treat content. Different platforms should treat illegal and lawful but awful content differently, even within categories such as social media or messaging apps, but certainly among them. And finally, we received a comment from the World Bank, which reads, implement an integrated whole-of-society approach that involves both supply-side and demand-side solutions for a well-educated and informed populace, addressing the underlying causes for the consumption, spreading, and fabrication of disinformation and hate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, with all of that, quite a lot to get through. We'll have just over 20 minutes. I would like to start with the African Union question. What is the African Union doing to address this problem?
Merci. Je pense qu'avant peut-être de répondre directement à cette question, je voudrais revenir sur le déroulé des débats tout à l'heure. Parce que je pense qu'un panel comme celui-ci devrait beaucoup plus regarder sur qu'est-ce qu'il est nécessaire de faire pour minimiser l'impact négatif des contenus de ces plateformes. Si on se met à pointer du doigt ce qui n'est pas bien fait par TikTok, par Facebook, je pense que chacun de ceux-ci pourra faire l'objet d'un panel. Les problèmes, ils existent. Aujourd'hui, nos énergies devraient converger sur quelles sont les intelligences, quelles sont les énergies qu'il va falloir mettre en commun pour minimiser l'impact négatif de ces contenus de nature à s'aimer le désordre, le chaos et à porter atteinte à la démocratie sans pour autant, je dis bien sans pour autant, toucher les libertés fondamentales sans verser dans la censure. C'est pourquoi il faut commencer par mettre en place un cadre légal et réglementaire qui tienne compte de la nécessité de modérer, de la nécessité de réguler et de la nécessité de protéger les droits fondamentaux et que cela n'est pas un préjudice ou que ça ne tende pas vers la censure. Parce qu'il y a 10 ans, on disait il faut promouvoir les plateformes, il faut promouvoir la technologie, il faut laisser faire. C'est parce qu'aujourd'hui, on s'est rendu compte qu'il y a des problèmes. Et demain, on fera face à d'autres nouveaux problèmes. Donc il faudrait qu'il y ait un débat dynamique, une régulation dynamique qui tienne compte des avancées technologiques, qui tienne compte des nouveaux défis. Faire quelque chose aujourd'hui ne réglera pas les problèmes de demain, tous les problèmes de demain. Il faut faire de la co-régulation, il faut mettre en place une approche participative. Pour revenir à la question relative à l'Afrique, quand vous regardez les contenus, le tableau, je ne dirais pas il est à 50% plein ou 50% vide, mais la tendance est de dire il y a de la censure, il y a de la dictature, on porte atteinte aux droits fondamentaux et à la démocratie. Tout à l'heure, j'ai dit qu'il n'y a aucune donnée universelle, à part la bonté, l'intelligence et autres. Toute régulation doit tenir compte des valeurs culturelles de chaque pays, des valeurs culturelles de chaque communauté, des valeurs culturelles de chaque région. Ce qui est accepté ici peut ne pas l'être de l'autre côté. Les discussions au niveau des communautés économiques régionales en Afrique, il y en a 5, ces discussions sont en cours, sur la régulation des contenus audiovisuels, la régulation des contenus en ligne, la responsabilisation des acteurs, des propriétaires de cette plateforme. Aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qui se passe? C'est que, je crois que madame qui a posé la question a parlé par exemple des GAFAM, il y a aussi les BETEX en Asie, qui sont malheureusement des structures à caractère extraterritorial, qui sont domiciliées sur un continent et qui fournissent le service sur un autre continent sans pour autant accepter de se soumettre aux exigences légales et réglementaires. Quelle est la meilleure façon de gérer ce problème? C'est la coopération internationale. Parce que sans la coopération, comment est-ce que je, en tant qu'Éthiopien, par exemple, gouvernement éthiopien, peut exiger d'une plateforme qui est aux États-Unis de pouvoir faire 1, 2, 3 si je ne suis pas en coopération intelligente avec le législateur, avec le gouvernement des États-Unis. Le deuxième aspect, c'est le renforcement des capacités. Parce que si nous ne renforçons pas les capacités des différents acteurs, qu'ils soient les acteurs, que ce soit les parlementaires, les États et les acteurs de la société civile, pour qu'on s'entende sur la notion de modération, l'importance de la modération et le processus de modération, on sera toujours dans un conflit de discussion où chacun peut voir l'autre comme étant un adversaire au lieu d'un partenaire.
Can I just ask you a very quick question? Are the platforms engaging with you? Are you able to engage the platforms meaningfully in the discussion about this, all of this?
Definitely, yes. It's a must. C'est d'abord, c'est une obligation.
But are you able to? Are they talking to the African Union? Are they responding? Do you feel like
la
they're
Commission de
listening?
l'Union africaine n'est. Il faut comprendre le positionnement institutionnel de la Commission de l'Union africaine, le positionnement institutionnel des communautés économiques régionales et des États. L'Union africaine est plus dans la coordination des approches continentales et dans le processus de mise en œuvre des cadres de référence à l'échelle continentale et régionale. Quand il s'agit du renforcement de la législation, cela se fait au niveau étatique. Donc, la Commission de l'Union africaine ne légifère pas. Elle n'a pas le pouvoir de légiférer. Elle a le pouvoir de recommander, de décider et d'accompagner les communautés et les États dans la mise en œuvre de leur politique nationale.
Thank you. I'm going to throw a question to all of you, possibly, whoever wants to pick it up. It was, the real issue here, TikTok and the Facebook Oversight Board is here, Meta is here represented in some way, but it is an issue that we are ultimately talking about. Content moderation is a form of self-regulation, and how do we engage the platforms? If content moderation is a solution, then how do you get the others who have no interest? Telegram was brought up. Telegram is run by a Russian guy who is in Dubai and has absolutely no interest in engaging with anyone. We've seen what's happened with Twitter. So I'm looking more at Chris and David, but anyone please jump in. Like, what do we do with these platforms?
I mean, I thought the question was in some ways more about gatekeepers. I mean, if we're just talking about sort of the content stack, we are missing, and I think the question was kind of getting at this, that we're also missing this vast ecosystem of other gatekeepers, and I think ISPs were mentioned. It's a difficult problem, and actually I want to emphasize this point. There's trade-offs here, always. I mean, there's no really easy solution to any of this. And I think when it comes to gatekeepers, what we do need to be doing is bringing them into the process, much as Chris was talking about bringing technologists. I mean, at that level, we're also seeing more, technologists, people thinking about architecture and so forth, bringing them into the process, but also encouraging, if not even requiring them, to do the same kind of human rights due diligence that we're talking about for, the different platforms that we're talking about here. And this goes, if I can just continue with one of the other points that was raised by the audience, the issue of anonymity. One of the things that isn't discussed much, either here, I mean, it's been touched upon, but also in the guidelines, is the absolute importance of individual privacy and security, in particular digital security, and that includes anonymity. And this goes to some of the trade-offs that we might be thinking about. There was an intervention from someone from Iran, and my mind immediately goes to the issue of how do individuals who are fighting against repressive regimes protect themselves when they also need to organize and they also need to communicate? Well, they absolutely need anonymity. They need security. It's true that there is some level, and the question was really nicely put, because you asked it as is it a potential solution? There are areas where anonymity is a problem. There's no question about that. But in thinking about how we solve these problems, whether it's gatekeepers or security, we need to be remembering that we need to ensure that there is a place on the platforms and across the internet for the most vulnerable, the ones who are most engaged in politics, who are agitating against repressive governments. And so you don't want to throw out something that is actually essential for many people around the world.
Yeah, and this latest sort of paid verification further undermines the whole anonymity thing as well. Yeah. Chris, do you want to jump in, or should we move on to another question?
I'm going to save myself for the free speech question.
Oh, that free speech was going to be another, my next question, actually. Very important point. So, yeah, go ahead. How do you address that?
Okay, because it came up a couple of times, which I love. The first thing that I'd say is, like, as a whistleblower, you won't find a bigger advocate for free speech than right here, right? I had to really fight for my voice to be heard. I had to fight against a big company. I had to fight against the Trump administration. I had the benefit of working with some fantastic journalists and lawyers to help me on that. But free speech obviously is absolutely incredibly important. I say that also as a gay person. Self-expression and identity is really important to me in my own personal lived experience. So I don't, so my comments weren't to disregard the importance of free speech. It's absolutely a critical consideration. But we can't forget that if you are relying on, if you have platforms that use algorithms to rank speech, what you see and what you don't see, that means that those platforms are speech actors themselves. So you can't get outside of this sort of issue that the platforms themselves are not neutral. It's not like the 1995 internet where it's just a forum and you post and anything goes and you can see whatever. These are active participants. You have platforms that are creating algorithms that are active participants in speech. Okay, and so if we are to take a view that free speech is important or human rights are important, this, at the end of the day, does become an engineering problem, right? Because at the end of the day, these are algorithms that are being designed and engineered. These are architectures that are being designed and engineered. And so what I'm saying is that if we were to create building codes for digital products, we could go beyond privacy by design and start to ask, should we have human rights by design? Should we have agency by design? That these values, these critical values, are so important that maybe we should require them to be considered by engineers when they're designing their products at the very beginning. So what I would say to all of those really valid points is that it's not to put engineering, it's not to pit it against civil society. It's not to pit it against human rights or free speech. It's to say that engineers are going to be your solution because they're the ones that are building these platforms in the first place.
Yes, Catalina, please.
Thank you, Natalia. Yo quiero retomar una de las preguntas que se refería a la propuesta de Evelyn Duke, que además es similar a la propuesta de la Ley de Servicios Digitales y que tiene que ver mucho con la manera de implementar una regulación que sea compatible con la libertad de expresión, porque ese es el gran dilema en el fondo en el que estamos todos metidos. Entonces, ¿cómo se puede hacer una regulación compatible con la libertad de expresión? Por ejemplo, alguien habló del modelo de negocio, se ha hablado del modelo de negocio todos los días en esta conferencia. Es posible que la regulación exija que las personas que diseñan las normas y las aplican no sean las mismas personas o los mismos equipos encargados de que el modelo de negocio funcione y tenga cada vez más dinero. Porque si son los mismos equipos los que quieren que el modelo de negocio funcione y tenga cada vez más dinero, probablemente van a querer que haya contenido más tóxico, que engancha más y que genera mayores ganancias. Entonces, déjame terminar un momento. Entonces, eso, por ejemplo, es una manera de regular las compañías que es compatible con la libertad de expresión. El anonimato. El anonimato es una garantía fundamental para las personas que viven en regímenes opresivos. Y el problema no es el anonimato, el problema son las campañas de desinformación impulsadas por gobiernos autoritarios, por gobiernos que no son democráticos y por grandes conglomerados. Entonces, lo que hay que hacer es detectar a través de análisis de riesgo, con terceras partes interesadas, con transparencia activa real, dónde está el riesgo y ser capaz de mitigar ese riesgo de forma tal que evitemos esas campañas. Eso lo hizo Brasil con un enorme esfuerzo en esta última elección y salvó la elección. Entonces, yo creo que hay maneras de hacerlo sin sofocar la libertad de expresión.
But we know how to regulate, how to make freedom of expression and regulation compatible. We do it with broadcasters. Isn't the issue here the sort of freedom of reach and distribution rather than freedom of expression?
Pero es que yo creo que no es lo mismo. Yo creo que es completamente distinto un sistema centralizado controlado de broadcasting que un sistema descentralizado global como las redes sociales. Yo creo que no puedes simplemente trasladar una regulación de uno al otro, como tampoco puedes trasladar la regulación ambiental o la regulación científica. Aquí hay unos bienes en juego que uno tiene que ser capaz de ponderar adecuadamente. Y yo sí creo que hay formas de regular la expresión que son compatibles con la libertad de expresión. Habría que hacer una revisión de las guías. Las guías pretenden hacer eso. Bueno, habría que hacer alguna revisión de algunas cosas que me parece que hay que ajustar.
Alors, je ne suis pas le représentant de l'Union européenne, mais c'est vrai que je voudrais dire un mot quand même du DSA. On a entendu la commissaire européenne tout à l'heure en parler rapidement. Le Digital Service Act, c'est quand même une avancée assez exceptionnelle en fait, dans le domaine de la régulation des plateformes. Et l'Europe, je crois, a été assez pionnière. Les guidelines de l'UNESCO, d'ailleurs, rejoignent assez le contenu du DSA. Donc, toutes les plateformes aujourd'hui, qu'elles soient européennes ou pas d'ailleurs, sont en train de mettre en place les demandes du DSA et donc qui organisent cet équilibre un peu subtil, y compris dans le régime de responsabilité des plateformes. Comme le dit d'ailleurs les recommandations de l'UNESCO, il ne s'agit pas de considérer les plateformes comme des éditeurs, parce que ce serait une grave atteinte à la liberté d'expression. Les utilisateurs doivent pouvoir poster librement leur contenu, choisir leur angle éditorial, etc. Et donc le DSA maintient ce régime actuel de responsabilité tout en imposant aux plateformes, et c'est très bien, de créer ces outils de modération, de créer aussi ces outils de transparence qui permettent à des chercheurs, des académies, d'entrer dans les algorithmes, de voir comment ils fonctionnent. Et on peut aller encore plus loin sur certains sujets. Il y a eu une intervention tout à l'heure sur le data sovereignty, la souveraineté des data. Et bien TikTok a presque pris les devants en ayant mis en place un système qui permet aux États-Unis d'avoir une entité tierce, une entreprise américaine qui est en train déjà d'héberger les données des utilisateurs américains. Et en Europe, on est en train de faire la même chose. On est en train de créer des data centers qui vont héberger les données des utilisateurs européens et auxquels des chercheurs pourront avoir accès et qui seront aussi protégés par une entreprise qui sera européenne. Voilà, donc ça, c'est des démarches très concrètes qui permettent à la fois de mettre en œuvre un droit européen qui aujourd'hui organise cet équilibre subtil entre liberté d'expression et protection des utilisateurs, y compris contre eux-mêmes parfois, et ce débat qui s'est ouvert sur aussi la souveraineté des données, la protection des données des utilisateurs. Voilà, donc nous on est très heureux en tout cas de développer ces systèmes et de les ouvrir notamment aux chercheurs, aux ONG, aux think tanks. Voilà.
Thank you. We veered far away from content moderation where we started, but unfortunately we are out of time. I think we could all carry on. Thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. Lots of inputs and lots of thought-provoking thoughts. Clearly, I think a consensus that content moderation is not the only solution, cannot be only solution. You know, some good thoughts for Chris that I was interested to see you, Catalina, especially agree on, that it needs to be, the regulation needs to happen on the tech level, and in some ways we don't need to be completely reinventing. That is not what you said, that's me saying reinventing the wheel, because we have regulated tech for hundreds of years successfully before. So thank you very much to all of the speakers, thank you to the audience, and hopefully this will carry on into the corridors and offices and other discussions.